Band of Brothers is certainly at the pinnacle when it comes to World War II productions. It's not hard to make the case that it's the best World War II miniseries. This isn't to say that it doesn't deviate from the true story a fair amount, sometimes significantly. What is arguably the biggest deviation from the historical record happens in the final episode of the series, titled Points, which finds the 2nd Battalion of the 101st Airborne Division's 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, including Easy Company, racing for the German mountain town of Berchtesgaden, the former Nazi playground. They are eager to be first to the town so that they can claim the best of the rumored Nazi loot. The series depicts the 101st as winning the race to Berchtesgaden and being first to explore the most significant locations in the area, including the elevated Nazi retreat known as the Eagle's Nest, as well as the recently bombed out homes of Adolf Hitler and German military leader Herrman Goring. As I'll reveal in this video, you might be surprised to learn that things didn't unfold that way in real life. I'm going to explain why it is in this episode of Band of Brothers that the series commits its biggest historical blunder. The German town of Berchtesgaden is located in the Bavarian Alps near the Austrian border. Adolf Hitler had become fond of the town after he started vacationing in the area in the 1920s. He bought a holiday home that he renamed the Berghof, which was located in the Obersalzberg, the mountainside village above the town. During World War II, Hitler spent more time there than anywhere else. Other high-ranking Third Reich figures, including Hermann Goring, Josef Goebbels, and Heinrich Himmler, also had houses in the Obersalzberg. Hitler had held many official meetings at his residence, the Berghof. He met Neville Chamberlain there in 1938 before the signing of the Munich Agreement, which he had no intention of honoring. He also met Mussolini of Italy there and entertained other world leaders, artists, and musicians. Nazi Party meetings were also held at the Eagle's Nest, which sat atop a nearby summit above the town of Berchtesgaden. The Nazi-constructed stone building was inaccessible by car. Instead, a shaft ran to the center of the mountain where an elevator with a polished brass interior with Venetian mirrors and green leather would take visitors to the top. As emphasized in Band of Brothers, everyone had wanted to get to Berchtesgaden, mainly for the fact that it was oozing with Nazi loot. In addition to the Americans, the French 2nd Armored Division was advancing there almost side by side with the U.S. Army's 101st Airborne Division. The British were heading there from Italy. Another group of U.S. troops, the 7th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division, acting on their own initiative, were making a dash for Berchtesgaden from nearby Salzburg, Austria. 2 blown-out bridges temporarily hindered the Allied advances on the mountain town. Unlike what's stated in Stephen Ambrose's book and depicted in the Band of Brothers HBO miniseries, the 2nd Battalion of the 101st Airborne Division's 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, which included Easy Company, was not the first to arrive in Berchtesgaden. In reality, it was the soldiers of the 7th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division, nicknamed the Cotton Balers, who got to Berchtesgaden first on the afternoon of May 4th, 1945. The 3rd Infantry Division was under the command of General John Iron Mike O'Daniel. The 7th Infantry Regiment secured the town without firing a single shot. They captured 2,000 German soldiers who were in no mood to fight. As seen in Band of Brothers, it's true that the Allies had feared the Nazi regime was mounting a final last stand in the region, but the rumored Alpine fortress never materialized. Men from the 7th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division began to explore the area. They made their way up the mountain and toured what was left of Hitler's bombed home, the Berghof. They took a Nazi flag that had flown over Hitler's residence. The commander of the 7th, Colonel John A. Heintiges, ordered that the flag be cut into pieces and passed out to his officers. Men from the 7th also discovered Hermann Goring's villa and his vaulted wine cellar underneath. Inside the vault were 16,000 bottles of all kinds of liquor on racks that went from floor to ceiling. Colonel Heintiges recalled, "We had Cordon Rouge, Cordon Bleu champagne, and we had Johnny Walker's Red Label, Black Label, American whiskeys. You name it, we had it." Heintiges quietly ordered that 6 trucks be brought up to haul roughly 6,000 bottles of liquor back to Salzburg, Austria. This contradicts what's seen in the series, which depicts Major Dick Winters as being the first to discover Goring's vaulted cellar and liquor collection. Winters surprises his best friend and alcohol connoisseur, Lewis Nixon, and gives Nixon first pick of the inebriating treasure. In both the series and book, Winters discovers 10,000 bottles, which is true, only he didn't realize that approximately 6,000 bottles had already been taken by the 7th Infantry Regiment. Nowhere in the book or HBO series is it stated that the 7th had been there. The French 2nd Armored Division arrived in Berchtesgaden several hours after the 3rd Infantry Division in the late evening of May 4th. In reality, the 101st Airborne Division, including the men of Easy Company, didn't arrive until the following morning, May 5th. They were essentially last to the party, not first, as they are falsely made out to be in the series. The largest cache of alcohol was found in the wine cellar of the Eagle's Nest, which sat roughly 3,000 feet above Hitler's Berghof home. The French had made the trek up to the Eagle's Nest on the night of May 4th into the morning of May 5th, having to climb the mountainside due to the fact the Nazis had disabled the elevator that ran up the center of the mountain. The Eagle's Nest wine cellar contained an estimated 500,000 bottles of booze, including some of the finest wine, champagne, and cognac. There were thousands of bottles of Chateau Lafite Rothschild, one of the most expensive wines in the world. Today, a bottle would cost you roughly $1,000. The French wanted it all, or at least as much as they could possibly take. French medics brought up stretchers to carry the stash down the peak of the mountain to the car park below. Others emptied the water from their canteens and filled them with wine. While Band of Brothers shows men from the 101st, including Easy Company, as being the first to explore the Eagle's Nest, in reality, they didn't explore the structure until either later on May 5th or the following day, May 6th, after the French had already been there. A limited number of men from the 7th Infantry Regiment had already been there as well, prior to the French. When Colonel Robert Sink, the commander of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division, finally arrived in Berchtesgaden, he informed Colonel John A. Heintiges, the commanding officer of the 7th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division, that the 101st was relieving them and they were to return to their area of operations in Salzburg, Austria. This is not shown in the series, which falsely portrays the 101st as the division that took the town. The upscale hotel, the Berchtesgaden Hof, was secured for Colonel Sink and regimental headquarters, which is shown in the series immediately after the 101st arrives. Just prior to the 3rd Infantry Division leaving the town on May 6th, Colonel Heintiges commented, "Boy, this is a hell of a note. Here we captured the last prize of the war, and we haven't got a damn thing to show for it." On May 7th, word was spreading fast throughout Europe that Germany had surrendered that day in Reims, France, to General Eisenhower. The definitive document of surrender was signed the following day, May 8th, Victory in Europe Day. To say there was plenty of reason to celebrate is an epic understatement, especially for the soldiers who had survived the war. Unfortunately, Band of Brothers only devotes about 8 minutes to the 101st time in Berchtesgaden. Reportedly, the party that had ensued around Berchtesgaden, the former Nazi playground, was legendary. Band of Brothers hardly does it justice. You could hear the champagne corks going off all day long, Sergeant Gordon Carson recalled. Private Webster wrote, "We began a party unequaled. Popping corks, spilling champagne, breaking bottles, raucous laughter, ringing shouts, loud choruses of lewd ditties. Plenty of cigarettes were smoked, guns were fired until they were ordered not to be, and Nazi cars were driven with abandon. Winston Churchill said of the German surrender that it was the signal of the greatest outburst of joy in the history of mankind." Across Europe, people took to the streets to celebrate. Strangers hugged and kissed, yet none deserved to celebrate more than the soldiers who had fought for their country and survived. Men like those of Easy Company. Men like Lewis Nixon. While we will likely never know exactly how much Lewis Nixon drank that evening and night, the consequences of his indulgence can be summed up in a single photograph taken on the morning of May 8th. It shows Captain Lewis Nixon, wrapped in a blanket, sitting up in bed, reaching for another bottle as he refuses to let the celebration end. While the series certainly captures the essence of what unfolded at Berchtesgaden, it erroneously credits Easy Company and the rest of the 2nd Battalion of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment as arriving there first. This results in an entire portion of the episode having a certain degree of inaccuracy. The series, along with Stephen Ambrose's non-fiction book, steal the credit from the men of the 3rd Infantry Division who had actually won the race to Berchtesgaden and were first to explore many of the area's most significant locations, including the homes of Hitler and Goring, as well as the coveted Eagle's Nest. So how did Stephen Ambrose make such a critical error in his 1992 book on which the series is based? It appears that Ambrose made the mistake of taking the Easy Company guys at face value, and he failed to corroborate their stories with actual unit records. This isn't to say that the veterans of Easy Company, including Major Dick Winters, lied to Ambrose during his interviews with them. It seems that many of them falsely believed that they were in fact first to Berchtesgaden. However, National Archives documents and other records, including reports from the commander of the Allied forces, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, prove this not to be true. In addition, Major General Maxwell Taylor, commander of the 101st, admitted in his post-war memoir, 3rd Division units got into Berchtesgaden ahead of us on the afternoon of May 4th. Part of the reason for the confusion may be because the 3rd Division units only stayed in Berchtesgaden for a short time and left on May 6, 1945, the day after the 101st arrived. And while men from the 3rd Division had been to places like the Berghof, as well as Goring's residence and the Eagle's Nest, their looting was somewhat limited due to direct orders from their commander, Colonel John A. Heintiges. They also left no signs of their presence to indicate to other divisions that they had been the first ones to those locations, something that they later regretted. Upon leaving the town, they falsely believed that history would not forget their achievement. Somehow, they had not run into the paratroopers on their way out of town. The press instead focused on the 101st, partly because they were in Berchtesgaden the longest and were able to collect many of the valuable souvenirs the Nazis had left behind. They were also more adept at publicity than the 3rd Infantry Division, which wasn't in the public eye as much. It's crucial to acknowledge this error in Band of Brothers, so that proper credit can be associated with the men of the 7th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division, also known as the Cotton Balers, who won the race and arrived in Berchtesgaden ahead of everyone else. During the war, the men of the 7th Infantry Regiment had fought their way across 2 continents and took on German forces on 3 fronts: North Africa, Italy, and Northwest Europe. The 3rd Infantry Division had suffered nearly 26,000 casualties during the war, more than any other division. It's a shame that Band of Brothers omits their role at Berchtesgaden, especially since the men of the 3rd Infantry Division have never received as much attention as they deserve. For me, this was the most surprising inaccuracy in the series, especially since the mistake was made in the book as well. Of course, as good as the series is, there are quite a few other inaccuracies in Band of Brothers. Let me know in the comments what you think is the biggest deviation from the true story in the series. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Anchors away, my friends.